all the documentation respecting the highly interesting organization of the German night fighter network under Generalleutnant Kamhuber remains in British hands. All attempts to date to obtain at least copies for the German military archives have been unsuccessful. It is all the more incomprehensible because the return of the material would not be against the interests of any nation, but rather of inestimable value for historical research. It will be a great success of this book if it inspires the old guard to criticize and correct me, or supply some missing pieces. I encourage it with a hearty Horrido! Into battle! Mano Ziegler, Germany, 1978. 1. Fritz Wendel, a test pilot possessed. The parachute hanging loosely from his shoulders slapped the back of his knees and looked a couple of sizes too big for him. His ground technician suggested he ought to shorten the straps. Fritz Wendel waved him aside. It was too much bother. When he had dressed for the first flight before dawn that morning, it had been bitterly cold, and he had worn his thick fur-lined combinations. The ridge of high pressure brought a cloudless April day. The sun had risen, and beneath the azure sky it had grown pleasantly warm. Some cumulus began to form during the afternoon by when it was decidedly too hot for furry combinations, and he had discarded them in favor of his lightweight flying overall. Hence the loose parachute. 4 o'clock was late in the day for a test pilot who still had a couple more flights scheduled, so he had to get a move on. The aircraft climbed. He had time to rehearse the drill mentally during the ascent to 18,000 feet. From there, at full throttle, he would put the fighter into a steep incline, as the manual called it. A works pilot ferrying in the first series of this particular machine had reported that at high speeds, unpleasantly strong wing vibrations developed. The aircraft was a Bf-109T. The T stood for Träger, carrier, for this was one of the fighters designed to fly from the flight deck of Germany's aircraft carrier Seydlitz, an Admiral Hipper-class heavy cruiser hull being converted into a flat top at a Baltic shipyard. Compared with her sister aircraft, the Bf-109T had broader wings, and that was suspected to be somehow the cause of the unusual vibrations. Exactly how that caused the problem remained to be established. Possibly it would need no more than a couple of flights to identify the fault, as was often the case, or even only one. In 5 or 6 minutes, he would know. Yet it was with the new aircraft, the Me-262, that he had allowed himself to become preoccupied. The airplane which would become the world's first jet fighter once the turbines were delivered stood in the experimental hangar below, due to make her maiden flight in a few days. And he, Fritz Wendel, would be at the controls. She might have only a piston engine and spinner for the time being, but nothing would keep him away from her. In anticipation, he savored this step into a new epoch of aviation history. At 24 years of age, Wendel was already the holder of the absolute world speed record and had brought the propeller-driven aircraft as far as it could go. He didn't claim all the credit, of course. Naturally, some rubbed off on Professor Willy Messerschmitt and his magnificent design and construction team. It was a joy to fly for an aircraft manufacturer who recognized no boundaries when a question of progress was involved. At 18,000 feet, Wendel leveled out and looked below. He could see the extensive Messerschmitt works, nearby the angular mosaic of Augsburg, with the narrow alleys of the Fuggerei inside the town. Beyond all the houses and factories lay fields, woodland, and mountains, the broad hump of the Zugspitze, and the bizarre rocky mass of its neighbors. Instruments okay? Everything ready. Throttle forward, nose down, and he went into the dive at full revs. As the bird hurtled earthwards, he heard the roaring engine, the howl of the slipstream, and watched the speedometer needle rise. 600, 650, 700 kilometers per hour. Through the cumulus. Now the needle indicated 750. Almost his